Flight 209er, clear for Vector 324.
We have clearance, Clarence.
Roger, Roger. What's our vector, Victor?
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 144 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're talking with York Alec Shackleton, the director of a new film, Disturbing the Peace. It's about a small-town sheriff who questions his no-guns policy when a biker gang invades his community. York has some interesting things to say about the movie and why you won't hear any sermonizing from his films. Confession time. I'm a straight white male, and I'm here to apologize for all of the above. I'm kidding, of course, but I want to state that up front that the push for diversity in Hollywood, which is all the rage these days, is good and it's overdue. I want more voices to share their talents with the world. That's great for both audiences and the artists themselves. We need it. But the craze to make everything as diverse as possible in as perfect a way as possible, it's exhausting. And we're seeing that this week with the Oscar nominations. Think piece after think piece excoriated the choices that were made. It's too white, it's too male, it's too white and male. And don't get us started on that Joker grease paint. Sheesh. It's both intense and unnecessary. The last 2 years for the Oscar nominations showcased a wide array of diverse choices for nominees. Seeing a single year like 2020 with more white faces in the crowd isn't a societal plague. Hollywood is improving. There are more diverse people getting their chance to shine at long last. It's not perfect, but it's progress, and you can see it on screens all over. Big screens, small screens, you name it. But change doesn't happen in a linear fashion. There are bumps along the way for sure. And yes, looking at the list of possible nominations, some people of color, you could say, were snubbed. I would have loved to see Eddie Murphy as Best Actor, at least a nominee, for Dolomite Is My Name. It's not going to happen. I'd also kill to see Paul Walter Hauser win the same award for Richard Jewell. And can you imagine Adam Sandler's Best Actor speech? I tune in that whole 3+ hour show just to hear that. Now, the woke media, and that pretty much describes every media outlet that is not conservative in nature, is obsessed with counting up people of color and women and demanding picture-perfect representation every time. It just doesn't work that way. One year we could have a flood of movie roles where people of color are just absolutely shining. Maybe the next year, less so. Nothing's really going to be determined based on that. There are so many factors that go into what makes a movie, why certain plots are approved, why the things we see on the big screen happen. You can't just boil it down to, we need more diversity, period. It's just not the way things are going to work. The bottom line is, are these stories good and do they deserve to be on the big screen? Let's start there. But this media frenzy for guilting voters into picking more people of color, is that really the way we want this system to work? I don't think that's fair to everyone. Talented minority stories can win Oscars all on their own, without the kind of guilty handouts they're suggesting. Now, moving forward, let's make sure every voice, every artist gets a chance to be heard in Hollywood. The awards will absolutely follow. And now here's the tweet of the week. This week's winner is Stephen King. Now, I have to say, by the time you hear this podcast, King could be canceled, or he might have already served up a mea culpa for his comments. But when the king of horror is right, he's right. And let's cheer on a liberal artist who stands up to the woke mob. Here's his tweet. I would never consider diversity in matters of art, only quality. It seems to me that to do otherwise would be wrong. Thoughts and prayers for Mr. King, gang. He's going to need it.
Hello, friends of Christian Toto. My name is Tyler Hummel. You may remember me as the host of FVTV Public Access as the Fox Valley Film Critics, or if you don't live within 10 miles of the setting of Wayne's World, as the regular film critic with websites like Geeks Under Grace. Are you looking for a timely escape from the rigmarole of your daily drudgeries as you're burdened with the existential malaise that the world around you is slowly crumbling and you can't do anything to stop it? Well, I can definitely help, because I have yet another podcast to recommend to you. The Groupthink Podcast is a fortnightly hangout where myself and interesting people that you've probably heard of kick back and talk about whatever we want. Recently, we've had venerable conservative voices like Esther O'Reilly, Alfonso Rachel, Faith Moore, Kyle Mann, Sean Malone from the Foundation for Economic Education, Calvinist theologian Emily Urban, and the Daily Wire's own Jacob Arion as guests. These conversations cover everything from economics to theology to Hollywood and much more. We've got a number of amazing guests coming up in the next couple of months, so definitely come check us out on YouTube and SoundCloud. Just look up the Groupthink Podcast at the Groupthink Productions channel. Again, that's the Groupthink Podcast at the Groupthink Productions channel. We're not the most popular podcast online, but we're definitely a podcast.
This week's hit tip is Dracula. The new miniseries stars Claes Bang, and isn't that the coolest name of all time? Ask the classic count, from the minds behind the Sherlock series with Benedict Cumberbatch. So far, so good, right? Now, Bang is amazing here. I'd watch him in a Once Bitten reboot. He's just spectacular. He's the perfect kind of Count Dracula. He's handsome, he's creepy, he's got a dark sense of humor. Wonderful. Bring it. Now, this is a 3-part series, and each of the parts is about 90 minutes long, so it's almost like 3 movies back-to-back. Some pieces are excellent, some are kind of exasperating. I love the first part. It's kind of like an old-school Dracula that kind of mirrors the Bram Stoker book. The second installment isn't as good, but it's also a lot of fun. It's a bit more constrained in its set, but I think it was an excellent follow-up to the first installment. The third piece, which is set in modern times, the more I think about it, the more I realize it's a mess. But Bang is so good. I couldn't help not watching it, and I think it was worthwhile. So I think you should watch all 3, just to get the full scope of what the production had in mind. Now, this particular miniseries does have a gender switch. They cast an actress who I've seen a couple times before, Dolly Wells. She's the Van Helsing character, and it's kind of brought about in an interesting way. But this often kind of gets my woke radar up, but she's great. Great dialogue, great performances. I just love what she brings to the production. And she's equal to Dracula in many ways, and not in the ways you expect either. So a formidable adversary, and it makes for a great confrontation again and again. The newest Dracula, it has a classic feel, but there's definitely contemporary influences here, which is mostly very good. And the early twists in that initial installment, amazing. I think horror fans are in for a real treat. This 3-part miniseries is available right now on, where else? Netflix.
Please subscribe to my daddy's podcast. If he gets 100 new listeners, he'll stop forcing me to record these spots.
York Alec Shackleton played professional tennis as a kid. Then he switched to snowboarding. Made a pretty big impression as a snowboarder. And then he switched gears again. He became an actor, leaving all those snowy mountains behind. Now he's a director with a number of projects under his belt, including a new film. It's called Disturbing the Peace. It stars Guy Pearce, and it hits select theaters and video-on-demand services January 17th. Now, York calls it kind of an 80s movie throwback, but it's one that depicts small-town USA with respect, even a bit of reverence, which is always welcome. York breaks down the new film, what it's like to work with Guy Pearce, and also his philosophy behind message movies. I think listeners are going to really like what he has to say about that particular topic. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with director York Alec Shackleton. York, you're a snowboarder who turned into an actor, then a director. It's not your typical resume enhancement process. I was kind of curious, did you have ambitions to be a storyteller even when you were an athlete, or is it something that kind of developed along the way?
I think it was like an underlying thing that was inside of me. I never really pursued it when I was younger. I was very active in sports, and I was focused on that. It wasn't until later in my snowboarding career because I was early on in that industry, there weren't a lot of us guys doing it in the beginning. And so when the industry became really hot, everyone wanted commercials, everybody wanted snowboarders for stunts and films, and I had happened to have an agent. And so I was getting a lot of stunt work and commercial work, and it just progressed really kind of naturally. I think because of the way I look, they started to say, hey, why don't you just play the character? You know, you can do your own stunts. And so I started getting some speaking roles, and I realized very quickly that it was something that it was fun, but it wasn't anything that I really could get serious and get behind. But I right away was very much drawn to the behind the camera side of it. And it was something that I had grown up around people that were doing that kind of stuff. I didn't really take a lot of interest in it, but I had seen a lot of it happening. And so there was definitely some instincts that were instilled in me from when I was pretty young, because I took to it fairly quickly and have been able to just continue to progress my skills, you know, one film after another.
Was it helpful to be an actor first and kind of segue into directing?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to understand all aspects of the filmmaking process. If you're a director, I mean, you got to understand what the actors are going through. I definitely feel like it helped me a lot in working with the actors and working their performances. You know, I did a lot of jobs on set too, where I wasn't a director. You know, I did all different types of things just here and there, just to experience them and see what these people were doing and what their job entailed, so that I could be an effective leader for them and help them in their departments. You know, I'm somebody who's very hands-on, so I got no problem jumping in and getting my hands dirty in any department to work with those artists.
Gotcha. And getting your hands dirty kind of describes disturbing the piece. Really is all action. You're jumped right into the story. There's a bit of a setup, but then you know exactly what's going to happen as far as the tension there. Talk about that approach. You know, I thought we kind of marinate in the town, but we're right into it. I love that kind of the concept. But as a storyteller, just maybe kind of break it down a little bit.
Well, I'm somebody who was kind of old school. You know, I grew up in the 80s, and I was watching a lot of those types of films growing up. Those were the movies that moved me, the 80s action movies, and even just, you know, the dramas. And so for me as a filmmaker, I think it's very important to bridge all of that. You know, these days you got an action movie, it's just action. There's a lot of screen time where there could be story, but there's no story there. They're just furthering you visually, and that's all great. But for myself, I really studied the art of telling stories, and I think it's important to have a lot of backstory in there, a lot of underlying themes, stuff that's bumping the main arcs that everyone's watching. I think those are the types of films that when the audience gets done watching it, they have had a conversation invoked. You know, I remember when I was young, leaving the theater, and I'd always be asking questions about the movie. And these days I see a lot of people just leave the theater and they're wondering where they're going to go have lunch afterwards. And so for me, I'm always trying to stick to what those early fundamentals of filmmaking were all about. And that's just the direction of the craft I want to have.
In your movie, you could almost say that the small town, the setting, is a character unto itself. There's a lot of, you take a lot of pains to kind of show the small town living, the character, sort of the ebb and flow of what life is like in that community. I wonder maybe you can share a little bit of that aspect of it. I really like that. I think too often when we go to the movies, it's New York or Chicago, L.A., and that's great. But I liked your approach. I thought it was kind of different.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great small towns all over the United States. You know, there's failing communities all over, and you go to some of these smaller towns, and I think a lot of people lose sight of the available production value that's there. You know, you go somewhere like Kentucky, where we were, and everywhere you go is a beautiful shot. I mean, the background is just these lush green trees, and it's very, you know, moist on the ground, so the texture and everything is very dark in the background, and you get these great grays and the old architecture, you know, just so many beautiful shots that when you go to an area like that, you can't help but go out and shoot an enormous amount of second unit. And I think that once again, that goes with the storytelling aspect of helping the audience get lost in this journey of these characters, make them feel like they're in this setting, make them feel like they're in a place where they've never been before, so that it's easy for them to get lost in the journey of the character that they're going on.
When you're making the film and you're on location, you're in a small town, capturing that small town feel. Do the locals help in some way? Do you kind of maybe have the story sort of maybe have a little bit of an alteration here or there because they suggest something, or something comes to you while you're on set?
I mean, you're just going to deal with the production parameters of shooting in a working town. You know, you've got majority of people are so supportive of the filmmaking process because most of them haven't seen it before. And I know that it's one thing that majority of people on the planet, if you ask them what would they like to do with their lives, I think a lot of them would say make films. It's just something that people are drawn to. It's an art form that everyone, wants to take a stab at. And so when you go into these areas, majority of the people are very helpful, very open. We try to be the best community members we can be when we come into your area, so we're trying to spend the money there, spread it throughout the community. So we tend to get an enormous amount of support, and through that, you definitely have someone who will come around when you're location scouting and say, hey, I know the secret little spot over here. And, it's all in how you handle the local community. If you come in and you're not being friendly with everybody and you're just trying to be a big machine, you're going to get some backlash. But if you come in and you're, trying to be an active member of the community for the time that you're there and work within them, then I find that everybody gets very, very helpful. And it does relate to better sequencing of shots for your film.
Gotcha. Your film has a really good leading man, Guy Pearce. He's a great laconic hero here. And, of course, he's got some backstory. We'll get into that in a minute. But can you share a little bit about what he brings to a movie? I mean, we see it on the screen. You'll be able to watch it. But just working with him one-on-one, a star of his magnitude, what's sort of the secret sauce that he brings to a production?
Well, every actor of that caliber, they've got their kind of techniques in the way that they like to work. And none of that's really specific to every film. So when you work with someone like a Guy Pearce, I think they look at every movie as a film-by-film basis and how they're going to approach each performance. So with this specific situation, I had never worked with him before. We didn't know each other. So it was a brand new kind of relationship right off the jump. But we found a great collaborative way to work together. And so at the end of each day, we would meet up and we would go over the scenes that he was in the following day. And we would really spend the time and work through them together, knowing that we had a very short shooting schedule. We didn't have an enormous amount of money. So we really had to make the best of all the time that we spent together. And so that professionalism and that ability to and desire to want to work with the director, especially a director like myself who isn't the biggest one out there, I think makes all the difference. And you don't get that with every actor. Some actors are just showing up and they want to just show up and do their work and they don't want to do anything in their off time. But with him, we were literally inseparable the whole time, working on scenes every free moment we had, rewriting dialogue, reworking scenes out. And I just can say that the guy is a talent across the board because not only does he act, but he's also a very talented musician. And he is a filmmaker in his own right. He does approach every scene, not just as a scene-by-scene basis, but he approaches them as how the scene fits into the overall film, which is usually the only person thinking like that is the director, with the whole overall. Mm-hmm. So he definitely brings a lot to the table as an actor.
Gotcha. The film touches on guns and gun violence and sort of the repercussions. The main character has a tragedy in the opening sequence. We're in 2019, the years 2019, 2020. People focus on gun violence in media. Does that sort of do you think about that with maybe extra caution when you're making a movie like this? I know it's escapism and I know it's sort of the good guys versus the bad guys, but I'm just kind of curious, is that sort of an extra point of focus as a storyteller, given the way the media works today?
Not for me personally. I don't feel like I'm somebody who's trying to walk the line with any of those kinds of things. As a filmmaker, I am very cautious about putting my opinions in films. I think it's a big mistake that filmmakers will do, is you'll have a subject and you have an opportunity to show that subject for what it is and allow the audience to make their own assumptions of whether they think it's cool, not cool, something they want to get passionate about, not passionate about, whatever it is. And so I find that I do a pretty good job of just showing the situation for what it is and allowing you to make your assumption. And so for me, I keep it very organic. These guys are robbing a bank. They're clearly going to have guns. I'm not trying to sensationalize the guns by having bazookas and overdoing the guns. I'm also not trying to downplay it because of society and show that the guy comes in with a little pocket knife to rob the bank. I'm just keeping it very realistic in how it kind of goes down in real life. And I think that equates to the female presence in the film as well. A lot of people have asked me, oh, in today's world with feminism and all this stuff happening, you've got these big, strong, powerful female characters in the movie. And I said, it's just organic. I wasn't trying to place female characters or make them strong. They just are strong women. And those characters are organic. They fit into the film in the right place. So I think that at the end of the day, our job as filmmakers is to always remember that this is entertainment, and we need to show the situations for what they are and not be putting our opinions in, because our personal opinions could be very much jaded depending on where we're from. And we live in Hollywood, so you're definitely going to have a very sheltered opinion of everything just living in that one community. I travel around, I shoot films in all different states all over the United States, and I see such diverse opinions on everything that I try to just keep everything very broad so I can hit the largest demographic of audience that I possibly can. And then I feel like we've done our job as filmmakers. We've gotten the story out there to the most amount of people and let them decide if it's something they want to get passionate about.
Gotcha. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned this wasn't a big budget feature. It's not a blockbuster. It's not, Star Wars Port 12. When you're a filmmaker and you're on the set and you've got a limited budget and you've got, the shooting time is set, I'm sure you have to get creative. You have to kind of go with the flow. You have to maybe make some decisions that you didn't expect, but often make the movie better. Any stories like that from the shoot where you wanted to go one way and then things just didn't work out, but it actually ended up making the film better?
Well, I think that happens on movies like this in every situation. I think if you try to go into the scene and say, okay, this is exactly how we want this to be done, but the production can't necessarily sustain that. They can't necessarily get you an element that you need. And if you're missing one piece of that puzzle, then your whole picture isn't going to be full. And so I think it's very important for younger filmmakers and independent filmmakers to be able to adapt on set. I call it making educated compromises. You know that, okay, the writer has written the scene, and the scene has a root to it. It has a seed, and this is the basis emotion of that scene, and the characters need to get from this point to this point within that scene. So if you have that basic structure, you can be creative on set and say, okay, this situation right here isn't working because we don't have this one element, so let's change this around. And that's one of the things that Guy and I were doing on this film continually when things, weren't exactly the way we needed them to be. If their vehicle wasn't exactly the way it needed to be, then we would look at it and say, all right, well, how do we still hold on to what the writer wanted and actually make the film better by just being creative on the fly in the moment, utilizing all of the tools that have been given to you, the best that you can possibly use all of those. Some filmmakers, they don't have those skills. They can only get it done if everything that they've shot listed is there on the day. That's great. If you can get that done, it's just like building a house. Once you've got your blueprint, you've ordered all your materials, the house will build itself. Mm-hmm. But, if all of a sudden half of that pad falls away, then you better redesign that house real quick or you're going to have some problems.
Gotcha. I was curious, you've had a lot of success with snowboarding and you switched careers, acting and directing. When you first became a director, did you have any sort of feeling like, oh, maybe this is not for me? Or was there a moment where either a colleague praised your work or a film fell into your lap that worked out, or sort of a moment that says, hey, this was the right path. This is my journey. I can do this. I'm good at the job. And I can go from there. I just had to did you have sort of any of those sort of aha clarifying moments along the way?
So definitely, I right away in the very beginning, it was something that coming out of snowboarding, I was very cocky at the time and was, feeling very confident. And I was just exploring things and playing with things. And so I didn't because I was taking snowboarding so seriously that everything that I did was for that it was nice to have something in my life that wasn't so serious, that I could play around and have fun with. And so I was really just kind of having fun in the beginning with it, experiencing it all, seeing what I liked and what I didn't like. And I did get passionate about making a film, not to actually make one, but passionate because I was an athlete and I had a goal that I wanted to accomplish, and it was make a movie. So I got very serious about that, and I made the film. I made a documentary on prostitution in Tijuana, Mexico. It was a human rights film, exposed a lot of violence and corruption in the government. And that is where I began learning not to put my opinion in films, because when you're doing volatile subjects like that, it's very important just to show it for what it is, or you could really get away with sensationalizing a situation that's actually very negative for the people that are involved in it. And so I made that film, and I, wasn't really planning on much happening with it, but I started showing it to a few people. It got into Cannes Film Festival. I then went and I met a guy who was a professor at UCLA Film. He got me a scholarship to UCLA Film. I went and studied marketing, development, and distribution of film because I wanted to know the business side of it, and really just started creating strong stepping stones for myself to get from one place to the next. And every single time I did one, I continued to get the type of praise or just recognition that I needed to continue moving forward. So all I needed was someone to say, hey, dude, you're kind of good at this, you should maybe keep going. And I kept hearing that. And so since I kept hearing that, I kept going, because I always told myself, this isn't something you're going to chase down and find yourself being a waiter chasing a directing job. You're either going to make this happen or it's not going to happen. And so every time I heard you're doing well, you've doubled up every single time, it just kept giving me the drive to keep pushing forward and pushing myself. It was the little bit of confidence boost that I needed.
Excellent. York, before I let you go, I couldn't ignore this part of your resume, I guess your background. I understand your father had a significant connection to Lenny Bruce, the great comedian, and he wrote some of his material. Tell me a little bit about, do you have any thoughts about, it seems far afield given your work, but any thoughts on comedy today? There's sort of this whole cultural debate about what you can and can't say, and I often think of Lenny Bruce and what he endured just to be able to kind of give comedians the freedom to say what they want. Any sort of thoughts in that regard? Yeah,
those guys, all of that took place before I was born, unfortunately. So I just kind of saw the post aftermath, of how that happened. And those guys kicked doors wide open for the whole comedy world, as well as just free speech in general. They were telling stories, true stories about people who were in power who did not want these stories being told. Now, these stories were not blanketed stories across everyone in those fields, but there was a lot of truth to them, and a lot of those people did not want those things getting out. Well, it opened a lot of doors for a lot of people, and you're now seeing a lot of those doors tend to be getting closed a little bit, and I think that, it's more important now than ever for guys in that field to remember that. I think about comedy a lot. I think about writing comedy a lot. But, it's something that is a very hard craft, and you have a lot of respect for those comedians and the ones that can get up and do that, especially someone like a Robin Williams, who's just so quick-witted, so fast with the brain. And that's not something you see every day, So when you talk about my dad and Lenny, my father could write really well, and he was very controversial, but he was scared of stage. He didn't want to perform. Well, Lenny didn't really have that in his mind to write that kind of stuff, but he loved getting on stage and performing it. So it just made a really amazing partnership, and then my father was able to do a lot of the managing and the booking of the shows, and was able to get him into a lot of those venues that was giving him that platform.
That's amazing.
And I think that we need to see more of that. Everyone's scared of, what's going to happen? Am I going to lose my career? But you look at the guys like Dave Chappelle, nothing's happening to them. They're gaining more and more success because they're not conforming. They're giving the masses what they want. They don't want your opinion. They just want entertainment. Make me laugh for 10 minutes because life's hard enough, Right. Take me on a ride and let me watch some guys rob a bank because I'm broke and I have no money, and I just love to fantasize about that for an hour and a half.
Gotcha.
And I think people just are putting too much pressure on all of it to change the world, when changing the world comes from inside the people, not the entertainment that we're putting on the screen.
Well said. I appreciate that thought and that anecdote. I appreciate your time, York, for joining the show. The gritty new movie is Disturbing the Peace. It opens both in theaters and video-on-demand services January 17th. It's a bit of a throwback, a little bit of an 80s vibe, but entertaining through and through. I hope people check it out, and I look forward to more of your films.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, man. Nice chatting with you.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter @HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.